Hey guys. So in the last video, we were looking at April 20th, potentially for being the raptured, and I mentioned that if April 20th passes, I'd be looking at Enochian Passover. So that means Nisan 14 on the Enochian calendar. And I'm making this quick video just to show you exactly what interests me about that date. So the first thing is, the reason I first noticed that date was that I was looking at the diagram that we've been developing for the last few months. And previously, it was just starting on October 4th and ending on the Enochian year end of April 20th. But I noticed that if you extend because I noticed that one event of 2023 that we didn't have plotted on this diagram was the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign, which occurred on September 19th. So I decided to plot it just out of curiosity. So if you plot that, I can maybe try to zoom in a little bit here. So before the earliest date on this diagram was October 4th. So I plotted the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign of September 19th. And as with every other date on this diagram, it has a corresponding mirror date. Okay, so the center point that all these leaves pivot around is Kislev 24, which is January 11th. So the mirror date of that child asteroid Revelation 12 sign happened to be Nisan 14, which, as we know, is Passover and in this case, it's on the Enochian calendar. So I thought, well, that's pretty interesting that just happens. It's not a random date that it lands on. It's actually one of the it's actually a moed, in other words, an appointed time. And then I noticed another thing that was pretty interesting. The date duration, or the number of days from these leaves to the center point, is 114 days. So it's like from the Revelation 12 sign on September 19th to the center point of Kislev 24, it's 114 days. And then from that center point to 114 is another 114 days. So it's like this whole diagram seems to be pointing at 114, or Passover, in other words. So I thought that was really cool. So let's take a look at that date. Nisan 14, 114. On the Gregorian calendar is May 4th. Okay, but it's actually, since this is a Jewish date, it's going to go from the sunset of the prior day to sunset on May 4th. So it's going to be sunset on May 3rd going into sunset on May 4th. That's 5/3 to 5/4. That also happens to be the Sabbath day. On the the rabbinical calendar, or the official Jewish calendar, that's going to be Nisan 26, or 126. Now, let me just quickly mention a reminder, for anybody who hasn't really been watching my videos. 241, the number 241, biblically represents Zerubbabel. And remember, we're always looking at Zerubbabel because at the end of Haggi, the book of Haggi, Zerubbabel is taken by God, and that we understand to be a typological rapture reference. So we're constantly looking at the book of Haggi and Zerubbabel. And the number 241 represents Zerubbabel because Zerubbabel in Hebrew gematria equals 241. Okay, so Zerubbabel has come up a lot in a lot of our studies in the last few months, and it's popped up a lot on this diagram that we've been developing. So anyway, I noticed about these dates. So first off, it's 5/3 to 5/4. So 5/3, May 3rd. So you can just write that numerically as 53, basically. So the 53rd prime happens to be 241. So that date, right by itself, is pointing at or is signaling Zerubbabel. And if you look at the following day, May 4th, that happens to be the day on which there are 241 days exactly remaining in the Gregorian year. So that is also very strongly pointing at Zerubbabel. And that also happens to be the 125th Gregorian day of the year, which telegraphs Revelation 12:5, because of 125 right there, 12:5. And in the last video, we were looking at the book of Acts, and we had generated a timeline for the Acts voyage of Paul that's mentioned in Acts chapter 27 and 28. And we started plotting that timeline and mapping it to the dates of this year at the 276 sign, which if you watch my videos, you know all about that sign. That's a celestial sign that occurred at the end of last year, at the end of December. And that occurred on December 27th going into the 28th. Now we started plotting the events of this ship voyage narrative on that date. So we mapped that date to the night before they ran the ship aground on Malta, because that's where 276, the number, was actually mentioned. And then we just plotted the events forward to see if we can estimate when they met with the brethren, which we thought was the event in the narrative that corresponded to the rapture. That meeting that happens south of Rome when Paul meets the brethren, sort of the end of the voyage, right? And that we were able to sort of reasonably estimate that could have been taking place on the date that maps to April 20th. Now, April 20th has come and gone without the rapture, but Brother G44 mentioned the other day something very interesting that I wasn't aware of. The date that we're looking at now, which is Nisan 14, which, as I mentioned, begins on May 3rd at sunset. May 3rd on the Gregorian calendar happens to be April 20th on the Julian calendar. So we then suspected that maybe we're supposed to do some sort of Julian to Gregorian translation, and that this timeline is designed to point us to the Julian date of the rapture. And at that point, you just need to apply this decoding layer of translating the dates from one calendar to another. Now, this is not just on the basis of the fact of the coincidence that April 20th on the Julian calendar happens to be May 3rd on the Gregorian calendar. There's also some evidence in the book of Acts, right there in chapter 27 itself, to suggest that the Julian calendar is somehow involved in solving this puzzle. So if you look at Acts 27, right there in verse 1, it mentions that Paul and the other prisoners are delivered to a centurion named Julius. Now, we suspect that Julius is no random name there. We think that God is using that as a hint to that somehow the Julian calendar is involved in the solution to this puzzle. So the interesting thing about that name is that it's found nowhere else in the entire Bible except right here in verse 1, and the other time it's mentioned is right here in verse 3. So these two times, these two verses here, right here in Acts 27, are the only time the name Julius is used at all in the Bible. It's Strong's 2457. You can see it's just used in these two places. And even if you're not using Strong's and you just do a search of the Bible, you won't find Julius anywhere else. So what that would mean is that potentially this timeline of the Acts voyage that started at the 276 sign as sort of the index, that might have been designed to give us the Julian or the rapture date in the Julian calendar. And at that point, you would just, based on the hint given there with the name Julius, you would just need to then translate that Julian calendar date to the Gregorian calendar date, and then you end up with May 3rd, which on which date at sunset Nisan 14 on the Enochian calendar begins. So that was a pretty cool tip by Brother G44. I think that's pretty intriguing. Another thing is that if you look at that date, those verses. Okay, so like I said, it's mentioned in Acts 27, verse 1, and then verse 3. And if you add those together, you get 544, which you can just compress numerically to 54, which is the date that we're looking at, May 4th. It could be a coincidence, but sure is suspicious. Now, another interesting coincidence is that the dates we're looking at, 5-3 going into 5-4, you can also write, in addition to writing it as 53, you can write it as 503. You can sometimes do that to on these shorter dates with a single-digit month and year. You can put a 0 in as a separator. So if you do 503 plus 504, you get 1007, which is the number of verses in the book of Acts. So that is an intriguing possibility. So most of the clues that we looked at last week that seemed to point to April 20th could still be completely valid. They could simply have been pointing us to the Julian date of the rapture. Okay, so now we're going to look at the book of Haggi real fast. So in the last video, we had attempted to solve the quote-unquote riddle of Haggi 2:16. And I'll just read it. Since those days were, when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. And when one came to the press vat for to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, there were but 20. So we've been working on trying to solve this riddle pretty much for 2 or 3 months now. And on the last video, we proposed that so what we did is just added up these numbers, the 10, the 20, and then the 50 and the 20. And you add those up and you get 100. And we thought, well, since there are exactly 100 days to from Kislev 24, because remember it says since those days were, and then it mentioned that could be a back reference to the first 10 where it mentions the 4 and 20th day of the 9th month, which is Kislev 24. Now on the calendar translation that points that refers to January 11th. So from January 11th to April 20th was exactly 100 days. So we thought that was potentially the solution to that riddle. But Brother G44 a couple days ago pointed out, I believe, I consider an even better solution to that riddle that points to our rapture date that we're looking at right now. So if you take those numbers and look at how they're used. So it says, since those days were when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. Okay, so there were only 10 out of 20. Okay, and then the next one says when you came to draw out 50 vessels, there were only 20. Okay, so there's only 20 out of 50. And so in this case, you've got 10 out of 20, and that's 0.5 or 0.5. And then 20 out of 50 is 0.4. And that from that you can construct 5-4, May 4th. So I think this is a far better and more satisfying solution to this riddle, because it's not just like a dumb summation of all the numbers. It's actually taking into account the the dynamics of the verse, like what's actually happening, what's going on with these numbers. And yeah, it's pointing seemingly at 5-4. So definitely very smart potential solution by Brother G44. Thank you, brother. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to look at real fast are date durations. So I didn't actually look at that many for this date, but I did notice that if you go from the original Revelation 12 sign of 2017 and you go to 5-4, which is our speculative rapture date, it's exactly 345 weeks. And if you followed my video for any length of time, you know how the number 345 is extremely pertinent to the rapture and to the 276 sign. I won't get into it too deeply here, but for instance, the 276th composite number is 345. That's just one example of many, how it's connected to the 276 sign and to the rapture itself. So it's a very, very significant number, and it's an exact number of weeks. So 345 weeks, 0 days, right, from the Revelation 12 sign of 2017 to our speculative rapture date of May 4th. And if you look at days instead of weeks, it's exactly 2,415 days. And if you look at 2000, if that at that number, 2415, that happens to be the 69th triangular number, which is awesome because 69 is a numerical reference to heaven. It's presumably where we're taken at the rapture. Now, if you don't know what triangulars are, or triangle numbers, it's simply when you take a number like in this case 69, and you just start adding all the numbers less than that. So you like 69 plus 68 plus 67 plus 66 and so on and so forth all the way down to 1. You add all those together, you get this number 2415. That's why 2415 is the 69th triangular. So for instance, 153, the famous number 153, is the 17th triangular, because if you take 17 plus 16 plus 15 plus 14 and so on down to 1, and you add those numbers together, you get 153. So yeah, very cool. So that's a nice like little date duration correlation there. Now the final thing I want to look at is in the celestial category. I don't have much to show except for that date. Let's see, May 4th. The sun is right in Aries, like right smack dab under the belly here. And it just so happens to be exactly at 44 degrees of ecliptic longitude. So, as we know, 44, or number 4 itself, represents the door, as in the door out of here, the door to heaven. And so 44 is just sort of an emphasized version of that. So, yeah, that's what we're looking at now. We're pretty hopeful about May 4th. A lot of cool and relevant signs, especially for me personally. This diagram seems to be, like the whole structure of it seems to be signaling Nisan 14 with the date duration of 114 days from the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign to Kislev 24, and then another 114 days to 114. But all the other clues are pretty compelling as well, and they all come together and make it more compelling. So yeah, that's what I've got right now. Just to sum up, I am looking at Nisan 14 on the Enochian calendar, which is Passover on that calendar, which on the Gregorian calendar is May 4th. And if May 4th should come and go uneventfully, then I myself will probably just be looking at Shavuot after that, which is, and that's Shavuot on the rabbinical calendar, and I think that's May 19th. You know, we can all sense very strongly that we're right here. You know, the rapture is imminent. We're on the doorstep of the tribulation beginning. I mean, just look at the situation in Israel and in the Middle East with Iran and Hamas and everything, and it's everything looks just about ready to blow up. And when it does, we'll be out of here. So praise God for that. So that said, let's finish the race strong. You know, let's be abiding in Christ. Let's be getting the gospel out to whoever needs to hear it, and let's make sure we're understanding the gospel correctly ourselves. Ephesians 2:8, for by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. And yeah, I guess that'll be it for the video today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Drop a comment down in the comment section if you have got any interesting information. Thanks again, and God bless.